What is important with engagement? You have to set some goals at the beginning of your engagement process. You need to set some milestones and indicators. So if I take governance, one of the engagement topic which is always very important for us typically is the board independence. But I would differentiate. Engagement could be in the short term or in the long term. You have potentially an investor who have a very short-term interest. There is some activist investors. And those, I would say, those short-term investors, those activist investors, think about it. They actually use all the engagement tools. They go to the general meetings. They try to take control of the board to push their strategy.
Herzlich willkommen zu einem weiteren ESG-Talk-Podcast. Ich freue mich sehr. Ich habe heute den großartigen Vincent Kaufmann bei mir zu Gast. Er ist CEO von Ethos Foundation und Ethos Services. Dieses Gespräch findet heute auf Englisch statt, aber ich bin mir sicher, das sollte kein Problem für dich sein. Und schalte bitte nicht ab, sondern bleib bei uns, denn es geht um ein, wie ich finde, sehr wichtiges Thema, nämlich The Power of Active Ownership in Corporate Governance. Das Thema Corporate Governance habe ich mir schon immer gewünscht und ich glaube, Vincent ist ein Profi in dem Thema, denn er ist seit Jahrzehnten mit Corporate Governance beschäftigt und ja, lieber Vincent, hey, let's switch to English. Hi, Vincent. It is so good to have you here on the podcast today. A warm welcome. How are you today?
Hello, Stella. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very fine. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be here.
Oh, fantastic. So the topic of today is the power of active ownership and corporate governance. Before we jump into it, I would love you to present yourself very quickly. Who is Vincent? Who you are?
So I'm a Swiss citizen. So I was born here in Switzerland, and actually I studied here in Geneva economics and accounting, and that was in the years 2000, and that was the time of the quite big corporate scandal in the US. Maybe you remember the Exxon case, the WorldCom case, and I actually, when I was studying that, I started to have some interest in corporate governance, and I had the opportunity to make an internship here at Ethos in the corporate governance field. So it was back in 2003. So it was the early days. We also had a corporate scandal here in Switzerland. It was the bankruptcy of Swissair, our famous airline. And many problems were identified actually due to poor governance. And so when I started at Ethos, it was as I was a young intern. I was explaining my friend I was doing an internship in the field of corporate governance to promote sustainable investment. That was back in 2003, so it was very early days.
Yeah.
And I stayed at Ethos from an intern 2003 to become the CEO of the organization back in 2015. And now I'm leading the organization. We are a team of 45 dedicated ESG specialists, so fully dedicated and committed to environmental, social, and governance analysis of companies. And I'm still fascinated by the topics, and hopefully we have some good progress. And I'm still very, very motivated in the field.
Brilliant. We need people like you. That's very good. This podcast is, in terms of topics, very broad, and I hope that I can catch people listening to podcasts regarding the corporate side or the nature side or the science side to listen to us today. And that's why I want you to start with explaining a little bit the meaning of corporate governance, engagement, stewardship, active ownership. There are so many words. So maybe you can clarify for us a little bit, what is the difference and what is important when it comes to corporate governance, ownership and stuff like that?
Yeah. I start with corporate governance, but there is some similarities with stewardship. I think this is all starting when you think about the dissociation of ownership and management.
Right.
So that applies when, as an investor, typically you delegate the asset management of your own asset. That could be because you are a worker and you give part of your salary to a pension fund for your retirement, and then so you delegate the management of some of your wealth to a third party. This is kind of a delegation. The same applies for corporate governance when you think about the spread of ownership of a large listed companies. So you got like a big company. If you think about, let's say, Volkswagen or whatever, there are thousands and thousands of investors. They do delegate part of their assets to the management of that company. And that's where there is a potential conflict of interest between people who are giving the asset and the people who are managing the asset.
Right.
And that's where you need some principles to ensure the interest of the beneficiaries are respected. And that was very theoretized by the conflict agent conflict problems.
Right.
Typically, you have a principal and an agent, so you have this separation.
Right.
And that's how many corporate scandals actually started, because the interest of the manager would be far away from the interest of the shareholders. Typically growing the company very fast by big acquisition, because then you manage a big companies.
Right.
Usually when you manage something big, you have more salaries. And is it really in the interest of the shareholders? Not always, because potentially you are destroying values. And that's kind of example we have. So corporate governance is all about setting some principle to ensure there is an alignment of interest.
And it's a little bit of a control, right? It's a very important part is control and transparency, right? Of a fair way of managing a company to increase the value, right?
Exactly. That's the point. Because and transparency, you're right. Actually, the financial statement of a company is the first basis to ensure an appropriate alignment of interest.
Right.
So when the management makes a financial statement, they give accounts to the owner of the company. And transparency is a very first and important way to ensure the interests are aligned. And that's all about annual report and things like that. And then the second big mechanism to ensure alignment of interest is compensation. You try to pay your management team in a way that they will create value for the shareholder, typically by paying part of the compensation in shares of the company. And the third mechanism, very important, is the board of directors. Because we cannot control, we are not, as investor, we cannot be in the daily business, cannot get our nose into all those companies. So we need people who will supervise the management. And that's where the corporate governance and the board composition comes into play. And that we want to ensure we elect people to the board of directors who are independent. In Germany, you speak about the supervisory board.
Right.
And that's really the supervisory function of the board towards the management board.
Right.
And that's where we need independent people and we need separation of function. So that's another mechanism of governance, typically. You're right, yeah.
Right. So this is corporate governance. So what is the difference now? Let's step into engagement. So engagement, does it mean that an owner of a company's shares is not only interested in a short-term value creation of its own investment, so it's more interested in the long-term investment and of the development of the company and wants to be a part of it or have a voice to influence it? Is it the correct way of saying it? Or you might say it much better than I do.
No. It's correct. It's totally correct. But I would differentiate. Engagement could be in the short term or in the long term.
Oh, okay.
You have potentially an investor who have a very short term interest. There is some activist investors who wants to take short term investment in a company.
Right.
To maximize the short term value. Usually it's not really aligned with the long-term interest of a pension fund. And those, I would say, those short-term investors, those activist investors, think about it. They actually use all the engagement tools. They go to the general meetings, they try to take control of the board to push their strategy. It could be very short-termist strategy to unlock value on the very short term, maybe divesting a division, making a big buyback program. So engagement could be also like, I would say the word negative here, because it's, for me, when it's too short term, it could be detrimental to the stakeholder value. So somehow we have to differentiate. When we do engagement, are you engaging for the long-term interest of all stakeholders, or are you engaging on the short-term interest for your own short-term interest to maximize the short-term value of the company? And we see both actually on the market. But here we're talking about ESG, responsibility, and fiduciary duties. So when you think about an asset manager who is managing the asset of a pension fund, if I take the pension fund, typically, they are actually managing the assets for a very long time period. Usually when you give some money to a pension fund, you want to get it back when you retire. So in 30, 40, 50 years from now on. So definitely the long-term interest is at stake. And that's where we think at Ethos, and we push really this long-term engagement in the interest of all stakeholders. And when we talk about stakeholders, we think about, of course, employees, suppliers, clients, shareholders, the state, but also the environment. I think the environment is often not seen as a stakeholder, but it is a silent stakeholders.
That's true.
So that's where we think engagement should be used to promote more sustainable practice among corporates.
Right. So and how does it work? Like actually, is it engaging only by voting on the general meeting, the annual general meeting, or how can engaging be part of? How can you influence as investor a company's development?
So it has been codified by the different stewardship code. Typically, I think there is different way, but they are very complementary. My vision is really there is a dialogue part. So you need to discuss with the company. You need to ask questions to the board of directors. If you're not happy with something, you first need to have a kind of a meeting. You can send an email, you can send a letter. So this is the first step you discuss. Then, of course, there is a voting. The voting is in many countries obligatory. If you are a shareholder, you have to vote. And voting is a very important act of ownership. It's a right you have to vote to decide on the board, on the compensation, all the topics I discussed before. So this is a second way of engaging, is really voting. And the third way is also for me to combine force. So you can make what we call collective engagement. You can join a campaign. This is the case with Climate Action 100+, which is a large shareholder coalition engaging all the large CO2 emitters. And you can also then intensify your engagement by being more vocal. You can typically go to the general meeting, take the floor. So unfortunately, in Germany, more and more the meetings are virtual only, but still you can make an intervention via
no
Zoom.
sausages anymore. No sausages anymore after the meeting.
Yeah, right. But it's a little pity, because I think it's very important to also the physical event, because when you go, you make an extra pressure.
Yeah, that's
it's different when you engage via camera than when you meet the people. So for me, the AGM is still a very important platform, even if most of the votes are casted in advance. But still, it's a platform where investor can really escalate when they are not happy. And then there is the additional steps which are possible. You can also, as an investor, make a proposition at the general meeting. This is called the shareholder resolution. So you become more and more vocal, because now you put your points to the AGM agenda. And then last but not least, you can go to the media. Company usually don't really like when there is some negative publicity about something. And you can, at the end of the day, when everything and nothing has worked properly, then of course you can always sell your shares in the company. So divest, exclude the company. To be effective, I think exclusion should be disclosed. You should say it. And that would be more effective. Because if you just divest without being vocal about it, that has not a lot of effect.
Yeah, this sounds a little bit like ghosting. Yeah, that's true. So exactly. it should be in a fair play, even on the investor side. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
So engagement.
So active ownership then means exactly what you're saying. So that you're in contact with a company, you look at corporate governance, you write letters, you go to the AGM, you are active in the way you are in contact with a company to support them to grow value and to grow ESG specific things to make the company change its business model or to focus on new products, services which are more in line with ESG topics. So this is what is it all about, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's best summary we can make.
Okay. Thank you.
but yeah, and I think there is potentially different purpose. What is important with engagement? You have to set some goals at the beginning of your engagement process. What do you want to achieve?
Right.
In some case, it could be a question of transparency.
Right.
Because a company could improve its disclosure regarding its transition plan. Sometimes it's more on strategy. You're right that we want the company to change its business model or to reorient its investment, its capex.
Right.
If you take the parallel, what Paris Agreement is asking, so the 1.5 degree, but the Paris Agreement is also asking that we should realign the investment flows towards the Paris Agreement. As the investor in company, we have two ways of doing it. We can realign our own portfolio, so we divest from fossil and we invest in renewables. That's a way to do it. Or we can start discussing with the fossil industry and tell the board, look, you have a big challenge with fossil. We know in 20 years we cannot use and extract those fossil. Those assets will lose value. We need to invest now in the transition. So you could ask the board to do it. And this is about engagement. That's exactly what you are saying. We want to engage the fossil industry typically to ask the board to do the work, to make the transition. And if it's not working at the company level, then yes, we have to do it at the portfolio level. But first, we should start to influence the real economy. As investors, shareholders, we have a lot of power. We have this ownership of those companies. And as owner of this company, we are the first actually to be able to influence this.
Right. So I think this might be a big difference as well when it comes to funds, when they are actively managed by a human being or human beings and an index fund, right? Because I assume, and this is another question for me, I assume that being an asset manager, managing a fund or a fund manager, and you have in a portfolio, I don't know, 50 investments. When it comes to corporate governance and engagement, you would engage in 50 different companies. So how can you do that? That's a lot of work. How is it possible to have this under control? Because you will be diversified. You won't only invest in oil companies. You will have different sectors, different regions, and different kind of regulations, I guess, and codes and principles and around the world. How do you manage that?
It's a big challenge. You're totally right. So first of all, you're right. If you are an active investor, you can more easily realign your own portfolio, invest in such company because it's challenging. It's managing better this challenge also. But the reality, and you're totally right, passive investment are growing. So investors tend to be more and more captive and passive. That's why they should be an active shareholder.
Right.
So it's not because you're passive that you cannot be an active shareholder. And that's where it's even more important to develop your active ownership strategy with all the components I mentioned when you invest passively. Of course, you can still make some custom index with some exclusion, but basically you're captive to your investment. And then the question of resources come into play, because typically if you want to track the index MSCI World, you got 1,500, 600 companies in it.
Right.
So it means, and the big problem we have is the concentration. All general meetings usually happen in March, April, May, because shareholders have to approve this financial statement 6 months after the closing. So most companies close on the 31st of December. So it makes a big workload on the busy season. We have tools to help investors to manage this. Most investors will tend to use some research when they do voting. So they acquire the research from a proxy advisor. This is institution who are making voting recommendation based on guidelines. So you have to act more on a systematic level. So you have voting guidelines, and then you apply them on each companies. Right. It's clear that you cannot spend 1 week reading everything on each companies. You have to focus on some key points. So that's where you need some help as a global investor. That's what we're doing at Ethos. We have a dedicated team which really goes into those annual report, digging into this information and making those voting recommendations. But still, it's very possible to do it. And what is very important for me, when you start voting, you can clearly then send your voting recommendation to the companies, explain somehow in a quite systematic way why you were not happy. So you have you define clear criteria, and then based on those criteria, you can engage the company. And you can be quite effective in this way. Of course, then if all companies want to discuss with you, that will take time. But you usually have 6 months after the general meeting to make this engagement working. You never really contact all companies in 1 year. You don't tend to focus on companies where there was some problem or where you had a lot of opposition. So that's where you can really find synergies between voting and discussing. Typically focusing on a specific topic. And then one way, and that's where collaborative engagement is very powerful. You can join some engagement platform like the PRI is making those, so the Principle for Responsible Investors. They are gathering investors around a certain topic, and then you can join. And you share the workload. If you think about Climate Action 100 Plus, we target 160 large CO2 emitters. There is US companies, there is European companies, there are Swiss companies, German companies. And we are among 500 investors co-signing this engagement campaign. And we share the workload. We can apply to become a kind of a lead investor in such company. Right. Typically here in Switzerland, we have Holcim, which is a cement producer, a competitor of Heidelberg Cement, typically, which actually is part of the campaign. At Ethos, we say we know the company well. We are based in Switzerland. We have a discussion with them. So we take the lead on that company and we do the engagement. But on the Exxon case or a US company, of course, it's more difficult for us to get the contact with the company and to go there. So we share the work. Some investors, US investor, will discuss with those companies, and then we try to also make those kind of collaboration and to share the workload among the portfolio to be more effective.
Yeah, okay. One thing, Vincent, that just crossed my head was, okay, you are on the institutional side. So you're in direct contact to companies. You do fund management, and this fund is traded to other institutional investors or might be for private investors as well. So now the question comes to my mind, what about engagement in corporate, well, engagement for private investors, like the small investors, like me? How can they make sure that they do good corporate governance and then they engage? I do understand they could by investing in a fund like from Ethos, right? Or Ethos. But when they want to invest in companies directly, so how can they do something similar? Do we have platforms like this for private investors, or is it like the only lonely soul in the AGM and the general meeting and raising its arm or her arm and saying, I want this, be better?
No, no, there are some organizations which are more acting on the private investor side. In Germany, you have DSW, which is actually Verein, an association for private investor where they will defend their interest.
Right.
They are
Okay.
part of a European coalition which is called Better Finance, which is really focusing on private investor,
Yeah.
private shareholders,
Yeah.
those
That's
who
so
are
good.
very interesting to companies,
Mm-hmm.
and goes to general meeting. And usually that's the same. We who will
Mm.
take the floor, who will participate actively, asking questions. So it's
Right.
possible. There are some platforms here in Switzerland. There is a small association which is called Actares.
Right.
They are usually association. And now we start seeing some platform for private investor here in Switzerland. We have a platform, a tech company called Innova, where you can acquire shares via the app, and then you can somehow join an engagement campaign, try to make it to be more like we have with how do you call that, fund crowding, so you can make engagement crowding.
Oh,
So that there are kind of those tech companies which try to do things like that, but it's very early stage. The problem is the resources and capacity, because
of course.
you have less, as a private investor, you have less volume,
Exactly.
so less resources. And then if you want to acquire some research, then it costs something.
Exactly.
It's not free. So that's a little bit the problematic we have with a private investor field. Who is paying for what? What we do at Ethos, we publish all our voting recommendation 5 days before the general meeting. So
Mm.
in case you go to the general meeting, you can see our voting record, voting recommendation, and you can start voting if you go physically to the AGM in accordance with our guidelines. So it's
Right.
possible. So we try to pre-declare some important vote to help potentially private investor exercise their voting right with yeah with intention to promote sustainability and good governance.
Right. Perfect. Perfect. When it comes to active ownership, so you already mentioned some challenges. Do you have like some examples for us where active ownership really made a good change of the investment and developed in a good direction for ESG, from the ESG perspective and from the value perspective of a company?
Oh yeah, I think we have many examples here. If I take one example here from Switzerland, I was mentioning Holcim case. Following all the investment, all the engagement we had with the company, there was quite a rethinking of their business strategy. and also investment to produce some what we call low carbon cement. If you want to do low carbon cement, you need to change your factories. You cannot just apply the same techniques because you use potentially more waste to create energy. So it means you have to invest in some filters. So with the engagement we had with Holcim, actually, we managed to push the company to publish a full dedicated climate report and to organize a vote on their climate strategy. And with the pressure we put on the companies, they actually improve every year their climate report and also set more ambitious strategies and more investment. So they committed actually to invest 500 million, so $500 million between 2022 and 2025 on those low carbon cement. They reviewed all the business mix by focusing maybe less on cement, but also going more on different kind of building materials. You know, building is quite a heavy source of CO2 emissions. So
Exactly. Especially cement. The cement industry is one of the heaviest CO2 producers when it comes to different sectors. And I think this is very interesting, especially from the investment perspective, in terms of saying, oh, I do not invest in all those companies, to invest in them, to have an active ownership, to change them for the good, right? And to give them some pressure. But you need to be convinced about that science, technically, it's possible to make this production be able to reduce CO2, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. And then that's a little bit more the question about what kind of, after 2030 on the cement industry, the big question is how far you can rely on the carbon capture, usage, and storage.
Right.
Not compensation, but it's capturing the CO2 from the factories and storing that typically in former oil fields under the water. So you give them back into the earth. If you start doing usage, it's potentially you re-emit the CO2 later. Because if you do some, you could, thanks to CO2, create some low, what they call sustainable alternative fuel for the aviation, but still the CO2 is still going out into the air. So it's more the circularity, which is you don't emit twice the CO2, so that's better, always better. But still, there is question around those tech. Are we too optimistic and too much relying on science and technology, which are not mature yet? This is sometimes my worry. But if we don't try, actually, we will never know. So it's still very important to push those companies to invest more and more toward those strategy.
Because it's hard, especially the real estate environment and the growth of human beings around the world is like we're building more and more and more, and we need more cement at all. So there is a big topic in terms of recycling, I guess. CO2 reduction in the whole process of producing cement. So there are a lot of topics, and I think it's a good part as from the investor side to put engagement on that, because I think this is what especially private investors many times don't realize, that they're owners, even with a small percentage or micro percentage, but they're owners of the company.
Yeah. So they are the one to decide somehow where the investment goes. And sometimes we also need to think about, it's good to have dividends, and it's very important, but is the dividend compatible with the long-term strategy of the company and in the interest of all stakeholders? We had one case here, a small factory, a small company which is producing glass, which is very important, actually. Glass also to avoid plastic and for circularity, it's much better. You can reuse glass many more times. And this company actually here had a old factory in Switzerland here, and they decided to close it and to focus all in Italy because salary was lower, so they made some investment there, and they said we have to close this factory in Switzerland because it would cost us about 20 million of capex to keep that factory open. Consequences, we have 200 layoff, so job cut. And on the same time, actually, the board proposed a dividend of 40 million. Interestingly, the large owner of the company, a family which owns 60% of the capital, controls the board. So, of course, the board is making the proposition which is in the interest of the family to get all these dividends. Potentially, the pension fund, which has a 30 years investment horizon, might say, maybe I would like a lower dividend this year, and I would like the company to invest more in this factory because I want something more circular. I want to keep the work, the job place, because it's quite interesting for pension to have still some work going on in the country. So it could be diverging interests also between different categories of shareholders. And that's very interesting also to think about what's your time horizon and how you want to influence the company with what purpose and what goal.
Yeah, very interesting examples. So development means in the ESG environment and in the active ownership as well to look on technology developments, right? And on, I guess, politically developments as well, maybe regulations as well. So maybe let's jump into the measurement of your impact. So you want to have a concrete impact of your engagement, so an outcome of your engagement. How do you measure that? Do you have clear goals at the beginning and you measure it after a couple of years, or how do you do that? And maybe let's jump into regulations as well, which are not so heavily important in Switzerland, but around you in the European Union. So, but maybe let's start with measuring the impact. How do you do that?
Yeah, no, it's a very important for each engagement campaign. You need to set some milestones and indicators. So if I take governance, one of the engagement topic which is always very important for us typically is the board independence. We want the board to be sufficiently independent to represent the interest of all stakeholders and not to be too much heavily influenced by management or by one single investor. So we want this board to be independent. So typically, we have an engagement campaign. We focus on the companies where we can say this board of directors has less than 50% independent board members. We start engaging on those scope of companies. And then it's quite easy to measure the progress, how many companies, how many boards are every year sufficiently independent. We do the same for the combination of chair and CEO. We don't really like when the chairman is the same as the CEO. This is not something in the Germany because compulsory to have a separation between the management board and supervisory board. But in France, USA, Switzerland, potentially,
there are a couple of countries you don't have that, right?
UK is forbidden. In Switzerland, it has almost disappeared because we had a lot of engagement. We also put some shareholder resolution. Ethos did it many times here in Switzerland to push companies avoiding the concentration of power. So it's quite easy to measure.
Right.
When it comes to climate strategy, one indicator we're using a lot, of course, you can measure the CO2 emission of your portfolio, but that takes time actually to move from the CO2 reduction to take place will take several years. Between the engagement ask and the concrete CO2 reduction could take 3 to 4 years. So there is a time gap. So one indicator we like to look at is if the companies have CO2 reduction target which are aligned with the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is SBTI. So to ensure the company has a CO2 reduction target aligned with a 1.5 degree. So this is measurable. There is a platform when you can measure the progress. This is one indicator. We can focus on the human right violation a company could have. We tend look at some of those indicators. In any case, we need indicators. And that goes to the second question, what we expect from regulation. I think as investor, we need strong reporting from companies, as we have for financial statement. It's quite easy to engage a company based on a poor financial performance. That happens a lot. As financial analysts will look at the companies and say, oh, they miss their EPS target, they miss their ROI target. What happened? Then the share price go down. So there is a strong pressure from financial market to ensure financial performance is adequate. Otherwise, you have direct sanctions, so you have prognostic and so on. With extra financial information, that's not the case. We don't have the same quality yet. It's improving. That's why we are really pushing toward the CSRD, and we don't really want the EU to downsize it now under the pressure from some states. We understand that some states think it's another bureaucracy on companies, which I can understand. If we target too many companies, should also have maybe some different expectation based on the size of the company. But sometimes I have the feeling it's a little bit an excuse to say it costs too much to get the information, because for me, what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So you need to measure. Typically on workforce, on finance, on environmental performance. So all those indicators are very important. So we need regulation, because self-regulation there, a company will always publish what's good. But we also want them to publish what is not good. Where they did underperform the peers. And if you don't have the same information on all companies, you cannot compare. You cannot say this one is a leader, this one is lagging. So to measure engagement progress, we need good data from companies as well.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And this is so typically in everything in life. If you don't know, you cannot measure, right? You don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. Full stop. And I like to remember the development of reporting on financial figures. There always used to be further developments where regulation wanted more in terms of reporting on financial figures. So it's a development, and we started on ESG, and I want and hope this to keep on going and to concentrate more. We have so many software companies on the market for the corporate side to help them to start with estimations and then really looking for the figures in detail to get a better overview about environmental indicators, KPIs, social governance as well. So governance is for many companies already a big topic, apart from social measurement and environment measurement. Time is flying. So, but I don't want to let you go so far. I have normally 3 final questions for my guests. So my first question for you is, do you have any further recommendation in terms of articles, links, podcasts, whatever, regarding corporate governance and active ownership?
Yeah, I think when we speak about corporate governance and stewardship, I encourage you to look at the Swiss Stewardship Code, which was published 2 years ago. It's based on the ICGN, so the International Corporate Governance Network Stewardship Principle. This document, ICGN is doing a great job in gathering all information on corporate governance and stewardship. So I really encourage you to ICGN has a great resources, and Swiss Sustainable Finance here in Switzerland also made some very good publication on the Swiss Stewardship Code. We at Ethos also produce our own series of podcasts. There is 12 episodes going on the governance. We look at also the Credit Suisse scandals, here in Switzerland. Nice. That was a big shock, and we have one podcast dedicated to identifying the causes and the roots and the causes. So quite a nice podcast series with different intervenants. It's in French and in German, so you can have that. And we have a lot of resources also on we have published last year a survey here at Ethos on the sustainability reporting of Swiss companies.
Brilliant.
And the main general meetings results here in Switzerland. So that's a nice study to look at if you have interest in the topic.
Yeah, this would be really, really cool to get all the information to put it into the show notes. My second question, most of my guests don't like it so much because I want them to look into the future. And as we changed the year, now we are looking into 2035. So what do you think? What kind of challenges, development we will see in the years to come, and where we're going to stay and stand in 2035 when it comes to corporate governance?
No, I think in terms of corporate governance, I'm hopeful we see a lot of progress, that the interest of long-term investor will be more and more better factored by companies. So and already now they are really discussing with their investors. They try to take into consideration a broad view. So this is going in the right direction. My fear more is the risk of consolidation, and to go a little bit in this unique view when you see how the financial world is consolidating with three big players currently owning almost 15 to 20% of the share capital of all companies worldwide. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, they become so huge. And this consolidation is continuing here in Switzerland when UBS acquired Credit Suisse. Those big investors, I think, is also a risk that there is a kind of a unique vision which goes on. And I think we should really, by 2035, give back the power to beneficial owners somehow. So that would mean that we open up a little bit when you have an investment fund, that the end investor could also potentially make some voting recommendations. That would be something very important in my view to avoid this consolidation and conflict of interest somehow. Big players.
Yeah, very important. My last question, do you have a wish to our topic? What do you wish for? Or you can have two. Vincent, you can have two.
That's great. No, I think we are very, I would like to see we have big challenge nowadays with our democracy, climate change, AI. That could go in one or the other direction. I really wish it goes to the positive direction and we use all those technologies for the benefit of environment and the future generation. We can use our intelligence. AI can help a lot to address some of the challenge we have. But I really hope it goes in this positive direction, and we should develop all those technology for the interest of future generation and not the self-interest of some big egocentric guy in the US. And that's a little bit of worry, but the hope I have that we are clever enough to use all this for the good of the future generation and the planet.
Yeah. Oh, this was just a perfect, very deep down last sentence. Vincent, I just have to thank you. It was a great talk, and it is so important that guys like you are focusing on active ownership and corporate governance. And it's so good to be an expert, and because I think over the years and decades, you generate so much knowledge and that you can implement in your daily work. And I think it's very, very important, even for like the smaller investors investing in your funds. And so thank you so much for having me on my podcast. Thank you, and hope to speak to you very soon.
Yeah, and congratulations for the quality of all your podcasts. It's a very great resources. I very much appreciate listening to them. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye, Stella.
Bye-bye. herzlichen Dank, dass du wieder oder zum ersten Mal beim ESG-Talk-Podcast warst. Unsere große Vision ist es, dass die Themen Umwelt, Soziales und Governance für alle Menschen, Unternehmen und Investoren selbstverständlich sind. Hat dir die Episode gefallen? Dann freuen wir uns über deine 5-Sterne-Bewertung und dein Abo. Teile den Podcast gern mit Freunden und Kollegen, damit auch andere großartigen Menschen tiefer in das Thema Nachhaltigkeit einsteigen können. Ach, und kennst du unseren YouTube-Kanal? Hast du Feedback oder Anregungen? Wir sind gespannt auf deine Kommentare. Und falls du ein Thema im Kopf hast, das wir noch nicht behandelt haben, lass es uns doch wissen oder werde selbst Teil unseres Podcasts. Jeden Dienstag gibt es eine neue Episode mit inspirierenden Gästen und spannenden Themen. Hör doch mal wieder rein. Vielen Dank, dass du Teil unserer Community bist.